This video is going to take you through the ins and outs of creating a character in Star Trek Adventures, which is a tabletop role-playing game. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that you're familiar with what TTRPGs are, who the player is, and what it means to be creating your character as you begin play. One thing that we should start with is to tell you what sort of characters this game and its character creation engine makes. First, it makes Starfleet officers. In particular, it makes highly competent individuals. It makes the senior staff, the bridge crew of a starship, in particular a hero ship, the sort that might be the subject of a motion picture or a television show. And the characters come together as part of character creation towards the tail end to become a team that will comprise that senior staff. And it does so by working forwards in what's called a lifepath character creation system. So it works to answer those questions of, why did you become a Starfleet officer? How did you emerge as a highly competent individual? How were you recognized and promoted to become part of the senior staff? And in what way do you and your crewmates form a team? So if you read between the lines there, you may hear that Star Trek Adventures is a specific role-playing game, specifically about Starfleet officers, the bridge crew, and not necessarily the lower decks folks cleaning up the holodeck after hours or playing Barfly or Dabo Girl at Quark's bar. To me, this is a feature, not a bug, but debating the specific merits of that is not what this video is about. It's just to give you a heads up. At this juncture, it's worth pointing out that the character creation system works backwards than what you might be familiar with. I hear very often that people want to create a first officer or that our crew needs a new helmsman. And it's fine to walk into this character creation system with those sorts of goals. However, it works in the opposite direction by creating a young person in the 22nd, 23rd century and watching them grow up and discovering why they decide to go to Starfleet Academy and how their career leads them to end up becoming on the bridge crew of the starship, which will eventually become the subject of your table's game. So rather than having a very quick pull-down menu of options to make a great helmsman, instead, the character creation system is giving everyone an opportunity to learn more about this character, their motivations, to answer the question of how and why they're here. It's the goal of the character creation system. It has a point besides just to give you a piece of paper to walk up to the table with. I have a video here on the channel about how I think character creation systems have goals beyond just giving you a sheet, and you can take a look at that. I'll put it in a card up here. Next, let's dive into the anatomy of your character sheet. How do all these different components add up to who you're playing in this role-playing game? But first, some introductions. My name is Antoine, sometimes known as the Complex Games Apologist. I have a lot of videos here on YouTube about Star Trek Adventures, including walking through the whole world of how to roll dice and use the mechanics outside of character creation. Have a look at those if you like. And if you find this video useful, then by all means, I would love it if you would like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. It helps me do coverage on other RPGs of this level of detail and veracity and focus, as I have more of an audience to support it. So thanks for tuning in. Now let's look at that character sheet. The centerpiece of the character sheet, the place that will decide more than anything else how likely you are to succeed at a given die roll, are your attributes and disciplines. Control, daring, fitness, insight, presence, and reason are a little bit more like personality traits or your moxie. What ways do you believe in yourself? And less like the sort of presidential fitness test scores that you may be familiar with from Dungeons & Dragons type games. Meanwhile, the discipline scores are your professional education, your experience and familiarity with the kind of things that Starfleet officers do. There's a wide array of cross-training and basic competency that everyone in Star Trek has, much in the same way that every astronaut has to learn to do certain things before they ever go up to the International Space Station. So everyone is going to begin with a 1, and everything beyond that is getting into really deep abilities and competence. Attributes range from 7 to 12, and disciplines from 1 to 5. When you attempt something which is challenging to a Starfleet officer, you'll add an attribute and a discipline together based on how you're trying to do it and what you're trying to get done. The ins and outs of the task system, how dice are rolled in Star Trek Adventures, is in this video here, if you'd like to take a look. Your values are a character's deeply held beliefs. In Star Trek stories, they're the sort of thing that can help a character dig in with that extra bit of perspiration or inspiration to see the day through. Or possibly, if they let it get the better of them, lead them down a bullish course of action that is maybe not in their best interests. Talents are unique abilities that separate characters from one another. They can let you get under the hood of the task system, roll extra dice, or possibly they give you something extra in the fiction of the world. Talents are one of the main things that set a main character, the sort of character we're creating right now, apart from supporting characters, which are all of your other crewmates that are a resource and an ally to be drawn upon that you can create in the middle of missions. So I think it's worth recognizing that while there may be other security officers who are a pretty good shot with a phaser rifle aboard your ship, you may be the only one who can stand up and say, "Follow my lead," and do this sort of special thing that talent enables. To talk about focuses, I'm going to ask that crazy guy who had the audacity to do a subscriber appeal in the first 3 minutes of the video to come back on. Sorry, everybody. If the core disciplines of command, con, engineering, science, medicine, and security represent the basic job skills that every Starfleet officer has to achieve a level of competence in order to receive their commission, focuses are at once something that is both more specific and less tied to the career and more to the passions and interests of the character. Take, for example, a security officer who has a hobby of practicing anachronistic blade weapon fighting. He's into swords. He could use this focus to be more effective in hand-to-hand combat, and that would apply with his security discipline. He could use this focus with engineering to forge new blades, or he could add his expertise to negotiations between two warring Klingon houses, where he weighs upon them to find a means of sheathing their blades and achieving a ceasefire. A command discipline might apply here, a way of negotiating warriors' honors within the bladed weapons, which are causing the violence in the streets. An interesting facet of the way focuses work in the dice engine is that they don't make you any better at achieving difficulty 1 tasks. After all, a die has to roll low in order to apply to a focus. If that same die is high and not a success, and all of your dice are not successes, then you're still not going to succeed. This can be imagined in the fiction as a character with focus in an area has a lot of special expertise. They can achieve complex tasks, daunting ones, but when it comes down to it, the challenging tasks that all Starfleet officers are expected to be able to achieve on a day-to-day basis, they're more or less equal at least achieving the task. It's the characters with the expertise that can generate additional momentum, the people who are the right person for the job. So your character with a focus is not necessarily going to lord it over his friends that he's an expert, so much as he's someone with valuable expertise. He's a great teammate. And meanwhile, your friends are people that you can count on to do at least some basic things within your area of expertise. They're not stooges, after all. They went to Starfleet Academy. So those are the 5 basic areas that comprise your character in Star Trek Adventures: attributes, disciplines, focuses, values, and talents. They come together through the lifepath system to show you who your character is in play. Of course, your character is also a member of one of the species that make up the United Federation of Planets. And that is the first step in the LifePath character creation system, which is what we're going to dive into and show you an example of in the next part of the video. Your choice of species is, of course, a huge influence on the fiction and the backstory of who your character is. In the mechanics of the game, it'll affect your character in two main ways. The first is the species trait, which, like any trait in play in Star Trek Adventures, can adjust the difficulty of some tasks, make them easier or harder for you, easier or harder for your opponents to do things to you, or might open up special tasks that only you can do. On my planet, we have a special way of looking at things, or conversely, on my planet, we have no concept of X, requiring a task where otherwise it would be just as easy as breathing air for others. There are no hard and fast rules about which tasks are enabled or affected by the species trait. It's the sort of thing that'll come out in the fiction as you play the game, and so it's not something to design a character around as much as something to keep in the back of your mind. The other way that the species trait affects your character sheet is that it can open up certain talents that are a function of the exclusive biology of a particular species or closely held cultural practices. Of course, it's entirely possible to pick up on these special talents by making a character of mixed heritage, someone who was adopted by people who didn't look like them, or has one parent from one species and a parent from a different species. The Star Trek canon has a rich heritage of folks just like that. It is a little bit outside of the scope of this video. I want to keep things simple mechanically, but just to let you know that that is an option out there if you're interested. Now, there are some bonuses to the stats that different species receive based on their inclinations and their strengths. But by the time that you're finished with your character, there are so many other sources of stat bonuses and bumps that everybody is able to achieve the maximum score, and any overruns past the maximum score are points that are just redistributed across the character in the finish-up phase. In the setting of Star Trek, the member world that a child is born on doesn't prejudice what the ceiling of their achievement can be. Bonuses instead are a sort of prompt for us to consider what sort of direction are the youths of a given species set off upon? What guidance leads them in this direction? How might they buck this guidance and forge their own path? The LifePath system is about discovering the story of a character rather than controlling its outcomes. So with that, let's say that our character that we're going to create for this example is an Andorian youth. From here, the LifePath system unfolds. First, we find out what sort of planet this youth is growing up upon, and what sort of upbringing they're receiving. Do they buck that upbringing, or do they embrace it? Why do they attend Starfleet Academy, and what happens once they're there, hitting the books? And what sort of events have happened to them during their career in Starfleet before they enter the stage of our game? We're going to cover that all, and show a true example right here on the screen with a character sheet, fully animated for your pleasure, in the next part. But for now, you've got everything you need to know in your mind to take a look in the rulebook and get this started for yourself. I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, stay tuned for the next part where we'll show an example, and subscribe and share this video around if you think that it has been useful in your learning of Star Trek Adventures. Of course, check out all the other tutorials of the rest of the mechanics in the game, and have a look at some of my other stuff if you like. For now, I'm the Complex Games Apologist. Happy gaming.